going to talk about summation notation. This is a summation symbol. These are what the parts mean. This means that this is going to be the first number we plug in for n to come up with our a sub 1, the first term in the sequence. So this is the first number to plug in for n. This number up here it's the last number to plug in for n. So we start with 3, we end with 108. 108 is not the last term in the sequence, or in the series. 108 is the last number we plug in for n. So what we're going to do is we're going to plug in, and we're going to come up with our sequence. This right here, this is the explicit formula. This tells us how we come up with the terms in our sequence. So to get the first term in my sequence, I take 3 and plug it in. 3 squared gives me 9. So the first term in my sequence is 9. The next term, with the next number I plug in, is going to be 4. So plug a 4 in and square it, and I get 16. I'm going to do this until the number that I plug in gets to be 108. So let's do a couple more. So 3, 4, next I'm going to plug in a 5. 5 squared is going to get me 25. Next I'm going to plug in a 6 and get 36. Do that all the way until I plug in 108. When I plug 108 in here, 108 squared, that's a really big number. I believe it's that number. Let me double check. 108 times 108, 6. Yep, 11664. Okay. So this is going to be my series that I get when I plug in starting at 3, going all the way until I plug in at 108. So this is my sequence. What I want to do now is I want to add them all up. In order to add all this up, it's my sum. I start with the first term, I add the last term, divide through by 2, and multiply it by however many numbers I have in my series. In this series, to find out the number that you have, we started at number 3, and we counted all the way to number 108. So how many numbers is that going to be? Well, if I had started counting at 1, then my numbers would I would put in 108 numbers. I would have had 108 terms. But I didn't start at 1, I started at 3. So how many numbers did I not plug in? 2. So I have 106 terms. So it's 106. Another way to think about that is you can always take your top number, which in this case is 108, subtract your bottom number, in this case is 3, and then add 1. We want to add 1 because you want to make sure you count this first number. So you add 1. So if I take 108, I subtract 3, I get 105. If I add 1 more to it, I get the 106 because there's 106 numbers. That's another way to come up with that right there. Now that I have all my things entered, I want to just calculate. So I take 9 plus this number. I get that. And I should have brought my calculator, but I didn't. So we're going to have to do this in class. So once we calculate this, we're going to get our number, and we'll put it right there. It's going to be a pretty big number. This is how we do the process. We're going to try another one of these. We want to find the sum. So we're going to have n start at 1 and go to 51. And this time we're going to do 4n plus 3. So what we want to do is we want to come up with our sequence, and then we want to add them together. So to get my sequence, I plug in a 1 first. 1 times 4 is going to give me 4, plus 3 will get me 7. So my first term is 7. The next term I'm going to plug in a 2. It's going to give me 8 and 11. If I plug in a 3, I'm going to get 12 plus 3, which is 15, all the way until I plug in a 51. When I plug in a 51 here, 51 times 4, this is going to give me 204 plus 3, so 207. So what this tells me is I want to start with this one being my first number. So my series, going to start with 7, add my last number, divide by 2, and then multiply by whatever number however many numbers I've put in my sequence. So I started at number 1. I went to the number 51. How many numbers did I plug in? Well, in this case, 51. If you want to do it the methodical way, you can take the 51, subtract your bottom number, and then add 1. By 51 minus 1, it gives me 50. If I add 1 to it, I get 51. It's another way of coming up with that number. Now that we have it, we want to add all this together. This is going to give me 214 over 2 times 51. Then this is going to give me 107 times 51. And I'm not so good at that in my head, so let's see what we get. So when I add them all up, I get 5,457 numbers. So I hope that I multiplied those all together right. But the general gist, this is how we do it. Questions?